The Rhine had swollen. Swollen from mountain rains, swollen from meltwater still cascading down from the higher reaches. On the journey from Mainz to Koblenz, I watched the water spread beyond its normal boundaries, creeping into the meadows where willows and grass ordinarily grew. This wasn't the world as I knew it. This was a world in transition. A world temporarily submerged, transformed into something else entirely. Something neither permanent nor without its dangers. The trees, great ancient willow trees, stood half submerged, their lower branches swallowed by the current, their roots buried meters beneath the murky surface. The water wasn't clear, mind you. It was brown, muddy brown, thick with silt and sand, carrying everything the Rhine had collected on its long journey through the lands. There's something rather strange about seeing water where there ought to be air, where solid ground should be. The riverbed itself was hidden now, part of this brown world that seemed to have no boundary between above and below. The willow branches hanging into the water didn't sway. They stood rigid, as if resisting the force, as if saying, "I've been here 100 years, and I'll remain, no matter how much water you bring." But I knew the power beneath that surface was immense, truly enormous. A car swept into such a current would be tossed about like a toy. A man wouldn't stand a chance. The water looked deceptively peaceful, but it wasn't peaceful at all. Just patient, waiting. The sun reflected off the water, creating patterns of brown and gold that shifted constantly, endlessly changing. It was as though the water were speaking, telling stories written in light and shadow and movement. The meadows I saw were a mixture of green and brown. Green from the trees, brown from the flood. Everywhere this blending, this fusion of two worlds. I could make out where the river normally flowed, marked by darker coloration, deeper brown, faster movement. But everything else was in motion too, only slower, only more subtle, less immediately threatening. A branch drifted past, a large one, broken free somewhere upstream, now living its own life, its own adventure on the water. I followed it with my eyes, watching how it turned slowly, how it struck against obstacles and kept moving. How long had that branch hung on its tree? How long had it borne leaves, sheltered birds? And now all that was finished, and it had become part of the river, part of the force flowing southward on this particular journey. There was something rather sad in that thought, but also a kind of acceptance. Everything ends, becomes part of something larger in time. The willows were quite beautiful in this state, so green, so full of life, even with half their bulk submerged. It was as though the flood had made them more vibrant, allowed them to expand beyond their usual limits, freed them somehow. Perhaps that's even true. Perhaps these trees need such flooding, need this element of risk, these nutrients, this water. These meadows are built for it, after all. They're neither permanently dry nor permanently wet, but in a state of constant transition, of change. And the trees that grow here, they've adapted to this rhythm, grown accustomed to water coming and going, to life and danger taking turns, to risk being part of the natural order here. There were birds I spotted, swimming in the water, or rather wading through it, searching for food. They moved with a strange elegance through that brown current, with a certainty that said, "This is normal for me. I'm used to this." A great heron stood at the water's edge, perfectly still, absolutely motionless, hunting for fish redistributed and freed by the floodwaters. The heron's eyes were fixed, concentrated, undistracted by the water's movement, by the train, by me. That's patience, I thought. True patience. Not the patience of mere waiting, but the patience of complete focus. The patience of the hunt. The water held colors I couldn't quite name. Brown, certainly, but also orange, yellow, green where the trees' reflections touched it. It was as if I were looking down at something living and breathing, not dead water, but something conscious, intentional. The flood wasn't a disaster here. It was part of the system, expected, planned in its way. The people who lived here would have moved things, packed away their belongings, known the water was coming because it always does, every year in varying amounts, but it comes. There was a stillness beneath the train's rumble, a silence born from nature itself, from this great, patient water. Those willow trees were very old indeed, far older than I am, older than anyone I know. They'd seen this flood 1,000 times, bent 1,000 times beneath its weight, straightened themselves 1,000 times when the waters receded. That's resilience. That's patience. That's a kind of wisdom that only exists across long stretches of time. Very long stretches indeed. A fisherman, or what I took to be one, stood at the water's edge, rod in hand, waiting for fish that might never come, perhaps scattered elsewhere by the flood, hidden in new places. But he stood there, patient as the trees themselves, patient as nature. What brings a fisherman out in such conditions, I wondered? Are there even fish to catch in all this turmoil? But perhaps that wasn't the point. Perhaps the point was simply to sit, to wait, to watch the world flow past, to hear what the water is telling. That fisherman was part of this landscape, part of these meadows, part of rhythms that have existed for thousands of years. The Rhine is one of Europe's oldest rivers, and it created these meadows, shaped them across millennia, gave them life, and took life from them. The train running on its rails is merely a newer intrusion, a younger speed, another way of cutting through the land. But the river was here first, will be here long after the trains rusted away, after the rails are gone, after all our human works have vanished. And yet they coexist, the train and the river, side by side, scarcely troubling one another, each in its own path, each with its own purpose, each with its own patience. There was something reassuring in the sheer scale of it all. The great trees, the vast water, the mighty river. Everything seemed indestructible, though I knew much could be destroyed, that these meadows were being eroded, rivers disrupted, human traces everywhere. But those traces still seemed small on this journey, not yet visible, not yet dominant. Nature was still here, still powerful, still dignified, still elegant. And I was grateful for it, grateful to see this before it changed entirely, before the world became nothing but human construction. There was something meditative about the whole scene. Something that quieted the mind, slowed the heart, washed away all the unnecessary from my thoughts, just as the water cleared unnecessary things from the meadows. I sat in my compartment, watching the water, the trees, the colors, and I understood that I was aging in that moment, losing years simply through observation, that looking at such things demanded a price in the currency of my life. But it was a fair trade. My life for these images, my life for this time, my life for this river. My eyes grew heavy. Heavy from the sheer volume of water, the endless movement, the hypnotic quality of the current. The browns and golds began to blur, mixing with my thoughts, my awareness, until I couldn't tell where the water ended and my mind began. The train moved on, ta-dum, 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 and I moved with it, drifting away, sinking deeper into this warm state, this state of inundation, of blending, of water. And the willows stood strong, their green leaves reflecting in the brown water below, and I felt myself standing the same way, strong in the current, in the flow of time passing. The flood would recede, the meadows would dry again, the world would return to normal, but not for long. The water would come again, the trees would bend again, and I would pass by again, see again, dream again. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The water, the trees, the time. Sleep now. Sleep. Ta-dum. August is the month when the vines begin to understand that their time is approaching, when the grapes have reached their full size and are simply waiting now, ripening, drinking in the sun, day after day, to build their sweetness. On the journey from Stuttgart to Heilbronn, vineyards stretch everywhere, across the slopes in perfect rows, laden with their wooden supports and wires, dressed in green leaves and ripening fruit. The grapes aren't fully red yet. They're greenish yellow, and beneath the sun, that golden hue seems to glow from within. But if you look closely, really look, you can see them darkening, taking on their deeper color, beginning to mature. The vineyards aren't wild, not natural in the sense of unplanned. They're designed, shaped, trained. Every vine in its place, each one trained to grow a particular way, to catch the sun at just the right angle, to bear its grapes at just the right height. That's craftsmanship. Centuries of human knowledge, a collaboration between man and plant, between will and nature. There's no wildness here, but no brutality either. There's a kind of harmony, a mutual understanding built slowly over years. The vine learning what's expected, the vintner learning what the vine needs. The hillsides follow the landscape's own contours, follow the river valleys, follow where water flows, where sun shines brightest, where the soil holds the right minerals. It's no accident that vineyards stand here. It's the result of centuries of experience, trial and error, observation and adaptation. Every region known for its wines has its own character, its own personality, each one shaping the grapes in particular ways, giving each wine its distinctive flavor. And someone from abroad might taste a glass and say straight away, "That's from Württemberg, that's southern Germany." Just from the taste, from that subtle understanding of where the wine was born. The work in vineyards isn't easy, mind you. It's manual labor. It demands attention. It requires something like love. Come spring, the vines are pruned, unnecessary shoots removed, directions established for their growth. Through summer, the foliage is managed, leaves removed that steal the sun from ripening fruit, grapes exposed so the light can reach them fully, so they can darken and mature. And now, in August, there's little to do but wait, to watch nature complete the final work, to let the sun transform the grapes into what they're meant to become. Someone could walk through these vineyards, could move past the vines, touch a leaf, feel the air's temperature, taste a grape, not quite ripe yet, still a touch sour, but already carrying the flavor of what it will become when the time arrives. August brings heat, brings long days, brings intense sunshine. The days are lengthy, starting early, finishing late, and if there's work to be done, you work in the light, in that warm, golden light. The heat is demanding. It's intense, exhausting, but it's necessary too. Without this warmth, without this intensity, the grapes wouldn't ripen properly. The wine wouldn't be sweet, wouldn't become what it's meant to be. There are little pathways between the vineyards, trails for the workers, routes leading to small cottages and houses tucked in the valleys between the slopes. These villages are ancient, traditional, soaked in the history of wines made here. Each house probably has a cellar, perhaps wooden casks, perhaps bunches of grapes drying outside to become raisins. The people here understand the significance of this work, the importance of these vines, that more than wine is being made here. History too, culture, a kind of identity for an entire people. The colors of the vineyards are varied. The vines themselves are green, but there's brown from the wooden frames, gray from the stones, yellow and red from grapes at different stages of ripeness. All of it blends beneath the August sun, seems more intense somehow, more vibrant, more meaningful than at any other time of year. The sky is blue, deeply blue, with only scattered clouds, and heat shimmers up from the earth, making distant things shimmer and dance, rendering reality a bit uncertain. I imagine the vintner walking these rows daily, observing, waiting, knowing that soon the harvest comes, when the grapes are picked, when all these months of labor converge into that single moment, that process of fermentation, transformation, juice becoming wine. It's uncertain. The weather could change, the harvest could come early or late, the grapes might not be as sweet as hoped, the whole year's yield could fall short or exceed expectations. But there's a kind of zen in it, an acceptance that nature does its work, and all a man can do is give his best, then let go, then see what comes. The train races past all these vineyards, cuts through the landscape, sees it all in swift succession. But for the people who live here, this landscape isn't swift. It's slow, it's patient, full of details, full of attention. They don't see the whole sweep as I do from my window, but the particulars. This one vine, that one branch, this particular grape. They know the history of each plant, where it took root, how it was trained, where it catches the best light. That's a different way of knowing the world, a way that demands time, demands patience, demands love. There's a beauty in these cultivated landscapes, in vineyards carved from wildness, taken from something raw and transformed into something tamed. It's not the beauty of untouched nature, but it's no less beautiful. It's a beauty of human understanding, of human respect, of human craft. And the grapes ripening under this August sun will become wine, will become something that brings people together, that people share, that reminds us of earth, of time, of the patience required to create this moment. The train passed through the hills, sometimes so close to the vineyards that I might have reached out and picked a grape if I'd stretched my hand through the window. A bird, a hawk or a falcon, something large, circled overhead, hunting, searching for movement. The birds are enemies to the vintner here, I suspect. They want to steal the grapes, take what he's labored so long to cultivate. And yet, they're part of this landscape, part of this system, part of the patience lived here. They can't eat all the grapes. There's always enough for man and bird both. Always enough for everyone. My eyes grew heavy from all this green and yellow and red abundance, from the intensity of it, from the heat pressing against my face, warming the window. The train rolled on, ta-dum, 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 and I moved with it, past the vineyards, past all this history, past all this hope waiting in the grapes ripening in August. I imagined how they'd taste, what the wine would taste like when the harvest came, whether that hope would be fulfilled or disappointed when the time arrived. And I closed my eyes, but the colors remained. The greens and yellows and reds mixed in my thoughts, blended with the warmth on my skin. The vines still stood there in my mind, stood waiting, stood ready, stood in their August heat, prepared for the harvest, prepared for the next chapter of their journey from fruit to wine. And I drifted away. Sleep now. Sleep. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The grapes, the heat, the patience, the ripening, the hope, the time. Sleep. Sleep. Ta-dum. Late afternoon is a special time, particularly in late summer, when the days begin to lose their length, when the sun no longer climbs as high as it does midsummer. On the journey from Basel to Freiburg, I see the orchards, not organized groves with uniform rows, but scattered trees, old trees, magnificent specimens that have stood here for decades, perhaps centuries. Apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, plum trees, all mixed together, each following its own rhythm, each at its own stage of ripeness. Fruit hangs from the branches, ripe or nearly ripe, ready or soon to be ready for picking. And everywhere across these meadows is grass, green, wild grass, unmown, uncontrolled, growing as nature intends it to grow. The light at this late hour isn't the harsh light of midday. It's softened, turned to something orange, golden brown, falling at an angle across the landscape, casting long shadows. The trees cast shadows over the grass so long they're almost as large as the trees themselves. And in those shadows, I see depth, texture, the intricate structure of the trees painted on the ground. The fruit is lit from this angle, becomes intensely orange-red in the late afternoon sun, transforms into glowing bodies that seem to say, "Take me, I'm ripe, I'm sweet, I'm ready." There are villages between the orchards, old villages with church spires rising from the green, ancient spires, centuries old. I can see them from here, traditional and topped with spires, clocks marking the hours. Villages that seem to have existed since Roman times or earlier, that have lived through wars, survived famines, simply endured, remained part of this landscape. And surrounding these villages are the orchards, the gardens, the fields that have sustained the people here, allowing them to stay, to keep their villages, to preserve their traditions. An old woman walks through the meadow. I see her in the distance, carrying a basket, searching for fruit ripe enough to harvest. She moves slowly, not because of age, but because the work demands it. Because one must move slowly to find the best fruit, to avoid the green ones, to skip the damaged specimens. She knows these trees, I'm sure. She was perhaps here when younger, knows the history of them, understands which ones bear good fruit and which produce smaller or bitter ones. Each tree is unique. Each has its own character, its own value. There's a stillness to this late afternoon, not born from absence, but from satiation. The birds have been active all day. They're tired now, singing less, resting. The insects are still moving, but less aggressively than in the morning. The whole landscape seems to breathe, to prepare itself for evening, for night, for the time of rest. And these orchards are part of that rhythm, part of this great breathing that the day does, that late summer does, that life itself does. The fruit isn't all equally ripe. Some are still green, others red, or yellow, or brown. Some already overripe, too sweet, beginning to ferment slightly. That's natural. No industrial plantation here. No monoculture, where everything ripens on the same day and is harvested by machine. Here, picking is done when the time is right, spread over weeks. Each fruit treated as an individual, respected for the time it took to ripen. Some are picked for eating fresh, others become cider, some become jam, others are hung to dry. Nothing is wasted, nothing scorned. A butterfly darts from tree to tree. No, wait, it's too late in the year for flowers. There are none left. But there's still life, still juice, still sweetness in the fruit already falling, already fermenting, already calling to wasps and flies and other insects. Everything is connected here. The trees feed the fruit feeds the insects feed the birds, and when trees fall or die, they become earth, become nutrients. New trees grow from that. It's a chain, a spiral, a continuity as old as the earth itself. This late light makes everything golden, turns all colors into variations of gold and orange and brown. Even the grass's green is now golden green, no longer the pure green of spring and early summer, but a green that knows it will soon be over, that autumn approaches, that colors will change. The trees know this too. Their leaves are already beginning to shift color, preparing for their fall, for rest. There's a melancholy in this late light, but also abundance, a gratitude for the harvest, for what this long summer has brought forth. There are insects everywhere. Tiny beetles crawling through the soil, living in the grass, on the fruit, feeding on the sweet juices, pursuing their own lives, their own purposes. They're invisible when passing quickly, but they're here. They're everywhere. The invisible population of these meadows, the essential population that ensures everything works, that everything connects. The train passes by all this life, all this activity, and no one inside knows what's happening out there, what's living out there, what's working out there. A butterfly with red wings and black spots sits on an apple tree's leaf. I see it for just a second before the train carries me past. It doesn't move, simply sits still, seems to meditate, seems to think. I wonder what its life is like, how long it lives, whether it knows this tree, whether it's been here before, whether butterflies have memories. Probably not. Probably its life is just this moment, this tree, the sweetness of the air, this late afternoon. But perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all one needs to live, to be happy, to spend one's time on earth meaningfully. The orchard meadows stretch out, extend in every direction, spread across hills and valleys. There's an infinity in this scattering, a kind of chaos ordered only by nature, by earth's boundaries, by rivers flowing between the meadows. And as the train traveled farther, the more orchards I saw, the more I understood this wasn't something small, but a great, cultural, historical landscape that generations had tended, that generations would need to maintain. These weren't simply fruit trees. They were monuments, memories, the essence of what it means to live on this land, to nourish oneself from it, to grow old with it. My eyes grow heavy, heavy from the golden light, from the beauty of these scattered orchards, from the complexity of the life unfolding here. The train carries me onward, away from the meadows, and I try to keep watching them, try to follow them with my gaze. But they fade, disappear behind the train, into my past. Late afternoon becomes early evening, and the light grows warmer still, redder, more melancholy. And I lean my head against the window, and my eyes close slowly, slowly, and the orchards are still there, behind my eyelids, still glowing, still golden, still full of life. The old woman with her basket is still there, gathering fruit. The butterfly still sits on the leaf. The church spires still rise, and the whole world seems to be drawing breath, preparing for night, for rest, for the time when everything grows quiet, when everything sleeps. And I sleep too, sleep with the orchards, sleep with the late light, sleep with the melancholy of late summer. The train rumbles on, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. And I'm in the train, I'm in the orchards, I'm everywhere and nowhere at once. The fruit continues ripening. The leaves continue changing color. The seasons continue their turning. And I ride on, ride on, ride on. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Sleep now, sleep, sleep. The meadows, the trees, the golden light, everything becomes what it should be. Sleep, sleep. Ta-dum, ta-dum. It was many years ago, in a summer I'll never forget. I was on a train meant to arrive in Stralsund, and I was heading to the island of Rügen. Everything was planned: the arrival, the connection, the little pension where I had a booking. But plans, they don't always have the same patience as we do they? The train arrived late. Just 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes were enough. My connecting train had just left as I ran down the platform, and there I stood, alone, with my suitcase and nothing but an empty ticket for the next morning. I could have been frustrated. I could have cursed or made a call or complained about the unreliability you find everywhere. But something in that moment, something stopped me. It was night already, around 10 o'clock, and Stralsund had grown quiet. The platform was almost empty. A single lamp cast its light inward. And then I smelled it. The salty wind from the Baltic Sea. That wonderful, heavy air that comes from the sea when it's night and the warmth of the day still sits in the earth. I decided to spend the night there. On the platform, on a bench, with my suitcase as a pillow. Sounds uncomfortable, yes? And it wasn't comfortable in the classical sense, but it was somehow right. I sat down, and the wooden seat was still warm from the day's heat. I leaned back. The sky above me was dark blue, not black, but that special dark blue of the Baltic summer night. The stars weren't particularly bright because the twilight hadn't completely faded. You see, the twilight hours last for hours after sunset on the Baltic. In the distance, far away, on the other side where the causeway to Rügen stretches across the water, I saw the lighthouse. Its light turned slowly, calmly, like the second hand of a great clock. Every few seconds that warm, yellowish beam wandered across the dark surface of the water. And I listened. Yes, listened to how the water struck against the causeway's pillars. It wasn't a violent sound. It was gentle, rhythmic, like a great sleeping creature breathing. The night wasn't cold. It was warm enough that I didn't need my jacket. I leaned back on that bench, and slowly, very slowly, the stars grew more intense. The later it became, the more the sky returned. I saw the Milky Way. That doesn't happen often in a city, but on that platform in Stralsund, with only one lamp nearby, I could see it. It stretched across the sky like a delicate, luminous, milky cloth. I didn't fall asleep all night. I simply remained seated and watched the sky turn. How the stars traced their paths. How the lighthouse beam danced again and again across the water. People came and went. 2 or 3 night trains arrived or departed, but otherwise I was alone. Completely alone with this great breathing water and this great breathing sky. And whilst I sat there, whilst the night and I observed each other, I understood that loneliness is not what we think it is. Loneliness is not sadness. Loneliness is not lack of company. Loneliness is sometimes a blessing. It's the opportunity to be alone with the world, with the real, great, wild part of the world that doesn't fit in books and can't be explained in conversation. The water still struck against the causeway's pillars, the light still turned, and I was grateful, deeply, contentedly grateful, that my train was late, that I was stranded on that platform, that I didn't escape this night, but fell into it. You know what I learned in that night? That life is sometimes a gift when it looks like misfortune. I wanted to go to Rügen. I was meant to sleep in a pension. But instead, I remained on a platform and shared the whole Baltic night with myself. No other person, no conversation, no distraction. Only the air, the water, the stars, and the quiet, quiet work of that lighthouse, turning and turning and turning. And in that night I thought much about planning, about all the years in which I wanted to lay out my path precisely, where I'd be, who I'd meet, what experiences I'd have. And here I was, on a platform where I wasn't meant to be, and it was the best thing that ever happened. Not because it was successful, not because it was good in the classical sense, but because it was surprising, because I'd given up my control and simply let the night hold me. Now, many years later, I'm sitting on a train again. It's night, and we're traveling through a country I don't quite know. And sometimes, in moments like this, that memory returns. Not as sadness that I missed what I'd planned back then, but as gratitude that my connecting train had left, that I sat on that platform, that I got to watch the night do its great, slow work. The salty wind from the Baltic Sea, it still draws through my memories when I allow it to. And the bench beneath me, that warm, solid bench, I still feel it in my bones when the night is warm and the stars begin to appear. That lighthouse, its light, its turning, its patience, it's all still in me. The light came towards me and caught me, and I laughed. Yes, I laughed in the darkness because I understood that life is not what you plan. Life is what happens when you're too tired to be angry, when you finally let your arms drop and say, yes, here I'll stay. Here I am. And now, on this train, in this night, I can let myself fall. I can lean back and know that the night is there for me, that it holds me, just as it held that bench back then, that the light turns far away and the water strikes against the causeway's pillars, and the stars trace their slow paths, and I'm safe here, in this darkness, in this warmth, in this peace that has no plans and no goals, and no fear of what might be missed. The train travels through Franconia, and it's spring. The vineyards outside are still young, the grapevines have just opened their buds, and everything looks like a promise just made. The air coming through the window is mild, and has that special scent of earth and damp wood and grass stretching. The train rocks slightly, as it always does when it goes up and down the valleys. and then I see him. A man in a black suit, completely black from top to bottom, and on his head sits the tallest top hat I've ever seen on a train. This isn't just any black suit. This is the uniform of a chimney sweep. The jacket has brass buttons, polished and gleaming. His neck bears a white collar, glowing white against all that black. And this top hat, it sits so straight on his head, as if it belongs there, as if he were born with it years ago. The man is perhaps in his mid-30s, and his face has that sort of stillness that doesn't match the profession. Chimney sweeps are loud, one thinks. They climb on roofs, they work with fire and ash and all the dirt that accumulates over years. But this man, he sits perfectly still in his window seat, reading a newspaper. I can't help but observe him. There's something about the way he moves that fascinates me. The newspaper is carefully folded, not hurried, but intentional, each fold exactly in the right place. His hands, I see them clearly when he turns the page. Under his fingernails sit black soot. That's his profession. That's his seal. But look how carefully he holds the newspaper. How respectfully. I've seen people handle the most precious possessions carelessly, but this man treats a cheap station newspaper as if it were made of glass. After a while, he looks out the window. The train is just passing through a tunnel. It's only a brief passage, perhaps 20 seconds, and as we emerge back into light, I see his face reflected. He smiles. Slightly. So slightly you could almost miss it. But it's there. Beautiful day outside, he says to no one. He just says it. Perhaps to me, perhaps to himself. Perhaps to this moment. Yes, I say. And that's all. We don't need to say more. He nods, a simple, dignified nod, and turns back to his newspaper. But now, somehow, I feel I know him better, that I understand who he is, perhaps better than if we'd had a long conversation. And I understand, too, that this is how people who understand get to know each other. Not with many words, with glances, with respect for silence, with the acknowledgement that not everything needs to be said to be understood. The train travels through a tunnel, and in the darkness, I can see the chimney sweep's profile. His face is concentrated on the newspaper, but his expression isn't concentrated. Rather peaceful, like someone who knows that his place in the world is secure. He says later, without me having asked, simply as if thinking aloud, that he's just come from a job. A large house in a village out that way. The chimney was full, he says, with the soot of the winter season. Perhaps 20, 30 years of ash. The owner didn't believe anyone could live with such a chimney, the man says. But that's the beauty. You can be freed from dirt. But you know what's beautiful? He asks. And now he looks at me, directly, with a sort of clarity that surprises me. The roofs are the quietest places in a city. I understand immediately what he means. The roof, that's the place that lies above everything. Above the streets, above the shops, above all the noise. When you stand there, when you work there, you don't look down, you look out. At the fields, at the forests, at the landscape spread beneath you, and the wind comes to you before it goes anywhere else. This man, this chimney sweep in his impeccable black suit and his tall top hat, has spent a large part of his life on roofs. No wonder he's so calm. I watch him fold his newspaper, and again, everything is perfect. No hurried movement, no clumsiness. He folds it back to exactly the size it was before, perhaps even better. "I'm getting off in Würzburg," he says. "My next job is waiting for me there." He doesn't say it with impatience, not with the feeling of being burdened, but with a kind of quiet acceptance, as if speaking of the natural order of things. As the train approaches his station, I watch how he prepares himself. He takes a small suitcase, black, naturally, and sets it beside him. He checks his top hat, adjusts it straight, though it's already straight. He brushes his trousers with a wave of his hand, though they're already clean. It's not nervous. It's ceremonial. It's the way a person respects himself, by preparing for the next moment. The train slows. The Franconian vineyards fly past, slower now, much slower. And this man, this chimney sweep with the black nails and the white collar and the top hat that sits like a small, dignified tower on his head. He stands up. He takes his suitcase. He turns to me and nods, not with words, with that simple, pure movement of the head that says, "I've seen you. You too deserved attention, and the world is better when we see each other." Then he goes down the aisle. I watch as the light of the middle Franconian spring sun falls across his black jacket, and for a moment, he looks like a man made of light, from black light, from the color of work, patience, dignity. The train stops. He gets off. I see him down on the platform. He sets down his suitcase, adjusts his top hat, and then he goes toward the city, toward the houses, toward the roofs, toward the chimneys that are waiting for him. And I sit here, in this train compartment, in this train that continues on. The vineyards roll past again. Spring is everywhere. The air is mild. And in my thoughts, this man sits on a roof somewhere in Würzburg and looks out, over the city, over the roofs, over all the noise and press. And he is calm. He is always calm. Because he knows that the world looks different from above. From above, everything is in order. Everything has its place. Everything simply waits for you to see it. The train is running through the Allgäu, and it is summer. The windows are open, not wide, just enough that you can feel the warm air coming across the green meadows. Everywhere I look, there is green. Deep, rich green, smelling of rain and sun. In the distance are mountains, perhaps the Säuling or others, but they're far away, bluish and dreamlike in the haze. And next to me sits a woman with a baby. She's perhaps in her early 30s. Her hair is woven into a loose braid, and there are strands falling into her face, not untidily, just naturally. Just alive. Her eyes are the sort that say, "I am tired, but I am also happy." A mixture. The baby sits on her lap, perhaps 9 months old, small enough to fit in her arms, large enough to explore the world around it. The baby's face is open and full of that special wonder that only small people can possess. The baby notices me first. I'm sitting across the aisle, and the little person fixes my face with an intensity that surprises me. Its eyes are blue, that clear, pale blue, and they don't move. It simply looks at me. And then, something wonderful happens. The baby smiles. A broad, toothless smile, full of trust and curiosity. The mother notices and laughs quietly. "He does that all the time," she says. "Just watching people. Watching the world." She tells me they're going to her parents. The first holiday, she says, since the baby was born. "My mother hasn't seen him in person yet," she says, "only on video calls. And my father, he doesn't know him at all." There's something in her voice, not sadness, but weight. The weight of a woman who's done much on her own. "I'm nervous," she admits. "I don't know why. They're my parents. They'll love him, but, when you've changed so much yourself, it's strange to go back to them." The baby reaches out his hand. I see those tiny fingers. They're startlingly small, but not fragile. These fingers are grasping at the air, at me, at the world. The mother takes the small hand in hers. Her hand is larger, but only by degrees, not in essence. I see the baby reaching for my finger. I encourage it, pushing my hand forward, and his grip is surprisingly strong. "The network of love," the woman says quietly. "How quickly it starts. From you, from your baby, to every person they meet." The baby watches the window now. The meadows slide past. The mountains slide past. The light falls warm across everything. The baby makes a sound, not a word, but a kind of singing. A squeal, but a happy one. It points at the sky, points at the green world, and the mother says, "Yes, yes, that's all for you. All of it." After a while, the baby grows drowsy. The mother rocks it gently, not with energetic movements, but only with the natural sway of her body as the train moves. She doesn't sing, she doesn't speak. She simply sits there, and the baby grows tired. Its eyes grow heavy. And then, this question comes. Do you think children remember train journeys later? She doesn't ask me directly, but I answer anyway, because the question is so thoughtful that I cannot stay silent. "I think," I say slowly, "they may not remember the train journey itself, but they remember the feeling that they're safe, the feeling that someone is holding them while the world slides past, the feeling of movement and warmth, and that someone is looking at them, seeing them." The woman nods slowly. Her gaze is turned toward the window, toward the passing green meadows. "I hope so," she says. "I want him to remember that I was there, that I loved him, before the world becomes too complicated, before he finds other things important." She doesn't say it with sadness, but with a kind of understanding, with the wisdom of a young mother who already knows that love doesn't last like a train journey. Love is something deeper, longer. The baby sleeps now. Its head rests against its mother's chest, Its tiny fists are relaxed. She is completely still, not tired, but calm, the sort of calm that only people who are absolutely necessary can have. She is necessary, and the child knows it, even in sleep. And now I see more clearly how young she is. Not young in years, but young in kind of newness. She was born anew when her baby was born, and now she must meet her parents and show them this new version of herself. It will be tense, it will be complicated, and yet she travels with a full heart to meet them. "Grateful," the woman says suddenly, though I said nothing. Perhaps she's talking to herself, perhaps to her baby, perhaps to me. That's what I want to remember. Not the effort, not the despair, the gratitude. She looks down at the sleeping child. That I had this moment, that I was present in this moment. The train travels on through the Allgäu. The green meadows, the distant lakes, the mountains, all of it gliding past. And I sit here, and I see this woman, sitting there with her sleeping baby, its tiny hand on her shoulder. The sunlight falls through the windows and makes everything golden. The meadows are golden. The baby is golden. The woman is golden. And I'm golden too, simply by being near this moment. In a couple of hours we'll arrive. She'll get out. The baby will wake, or perhaps it will keep sleeping, in its grandmother's arms. And I'll carry on this train, going where I'm going. But this moment remains. This woman who chose to be grateful. This small hand reaching toward the world. This love that needs no words because it fills the whole space. And I'm sleepy now, so sleepy. And I know that the dream I'm about to have, it will be full of green meadows, full of golden light, full of a woman and a child holding each other, while the world slides past. The golden pass doesn't hurry. That's the thing about this line. There's no rush. The train knows people come here to look, not to arrive. Montreux is behind us now. That glittering, spotless Montreux, with its villas along Lake Léman. And now we're climbing into the mountains. The lake still sits below us, calm and flat, with that peculiar grey-blue that water gets when autumn's beginning to turn. The sky's overcast, but not threatening. More soft, dampened, like a linen blanket. And a row ahead of me, there's an older gentleman carving a pipe. His hands are the first thing I notice. Not because they're particularly large or striking, they're ordinary enough, ordinary for a man in his 70s. But the way they move, there's a certainty there, you see. The kind you only get when someone's done something 10,000 times. His fingers hold a small, curved blade. Not a big carving tool, but something intimate, almost domestic. And the wood, it's briar, I'd say. That dense, dark wood with its rough, almost raw color. The proper material for a good pipe. I'm fascinated enough to ask. That's fine work, I say. Not because I'm admiring the pipe itself, it's nowhere near finished, but because I want to understand what I'm looking at. The man glances up, and his look is friendly. "Thank you," he says. "I've been doing this for quite a long time." He has that Swiss accent that softens the words, but his eyes are sharp as tacks. "Since 1973, he adds. "The beginning." 50 years. 5 decades. A whole generation of people have been born and grown up, whilst this man's been carving pipes from wood. Why pipes? I ask. And it's perhaps a foolish question, but he answers seriously. Because, he says, a pipe is a dialogue between you and the material. The wood tells you where it wants to break. It tells you where it'll hold. It tells you where the beauty lives. His hands begin to work again. The blade is thin, the movements slow and precise. And because, he adds quietly, I must make one before I die. The light shifts as the train climbs higher. Lake Léman becomes mist below us, grey-green and distant. The terraced vineyards of Lavaux appear, those emerald-green terraces carved like steps into the earth, and the man carries on working. His focus is entirely on the wood. How many have you made? I ask. He laughs, a quiet, deep laugh. Hundreds, thousands perhaps. I've lost count. He says it as if numbers don't really matter, as if it's a quantity beyond counting. But, he says, and here his voice turns serious, I smoke only one. The pipe he's carving today won't be that one. The one he smokes is his first, from 1973. It sits on my mantelpiece, he says. I look at it before I sleep, and I smoke it sometimes, not often, mind you, but sometimes. And I can feel that I was young, that my hands were new, that the world was still open. The train passes through a tunnel, brief, just a few seconds, and everything goes dark. His hands work on, completely sure, even without light. I can only hear the scraping of the blade, that very precise, very quiet sound of wood yielding. And then we're out again. The sky has changed, the mist has settled lower, and now I see the mountains towering above us, those steep great walls of rock that close in on the lake come autumn. The man pauses. He gazes out at the mountain walls, and for a moment he forgets his pipe. Or perhaps he's still thinking of it. Perhaps the mountain walls are a kind of pipe too, a way the earth carves itself. Tell me, he says to me, suddenly, without preamble, what would you do if you had only one piece of wood left? The question falls like a stone into still water. I don't know how to answer. One piece of wood. The last piece. What would I do? What would I make? And he just sits there, watching me, not waiting for an answer, just asking. The question hangs in the space between us, and that's enough. I think of all the people I know, and how they treat that last piece of wood. With fear, with hurry, with the need to get it right. And this man would probably just slow down further, become even more careful. Time would cease to be a pressure. Time would become a gift. The man turns back to his pipe. His blade is gentle. His eyes are old. But his hands are timeless. They're carving still. Whatever he asks, whatever we don't answer, his hands carry on carving. They've perhaps taken 50 years to learn what they know, but they know. The first pipe, he says, not looking up. I made that one to see if I could. Every pipe since I've made to understand it better. But this one here, and he pauses. I'm carving this one to love it. The train slows further still. The mountains are very close now. The colors of autumn are everywhere. Ochre brown, deep red, the last gold in the higher slopes. The road behind has vanished into mist. And we're here, in this compartment, in this moment, an old man and I, and an unfinished pipe, and this question that didn't need asking. I don't know what I'd answer if that were the last piece of wood. I sit quietly, watching him work, and slowly, so slowly you can't quite see it happening, I grow drowsy. The train rocks me. The mountain wind sings through the windows. The man carves on, and I can only think, if this were my last moment, not my last piece of wood, but my final moment altogether, I'd want to be here, with this man, with his hands that know what to do, with this question I can't answer, with this train creeping through the mountains, and this pipe that may or may not be finished. And it won't matter, because the work is everything. The train runs a short line from Lübeck to Travemünde. It's a route you might easily forget, not long enough to feel significant, not dramatic enough to impress. But it's summer, and the sun's moving west, and everything's golden. The light falls at an angle through the windows, making the compartments warm as honey. I'm sitting alone for a moment, in an ordinary carriage, and I'm perfectly still, perfectly present. And then, 3 or 4 rows ahead, I see 2 women. They're older. Not old, but old enough that life's known them for a long while now. Perhaps in their 70s. They're both wearing simple, practical clothes. No silk, no flower patterns, just solid colors and good fabric. One of them leans against the other, not dramatically, but with the matter-of-factness of 2 people who've been trusting each other for decades. They don't need a word. They simply sit together, and the contact between them, shoulder to shoulder, tells me everything I need to know. I understand at once that they're sisters. Not because their faces are similar, they're different enough, but because the way they are together, that's something only sisters can have. There's a synchronicity without words. The ability to laugh at the same moment without having heard anything funny. The way they move, as if there's music playing and they're both dancing to the same invisible tune. One of them, the one in the pale blue dress, pulls out a paper bag, an old, reused thing, not one of those new plastic carriers, but the sort of bag you'd buy in Lübeck, and she shares what's in it with the other. I don't see exactly what it is, but I smell it. Marzipan. That famous Lübeck marzipan, sweet and creamy, and the finest in the world. The woman with the grayer hair, the sister with the grayer hair, takes a bite, and they both laugh. A quiet laugh, like 2 people reminded of something funny that only they would understand. I'm not inventing their story. I'm simply watching it. I see their history in the way one looks at the other. There's tenderness there, yes, but something deeper too. A kind of understanding that only comes from shared years, from childhood together, from every season together, from losses and joys that had to be shared because there was only one other person who truly understood. And now, in their 70s, perhaps their 80s, they're traveling together to the seaside, on a short, simple journey, as if it were always the same, the comfort of it, the safety. One breaks the marzipan in half and gives the other her share. It's an unconscious gesture. It's not, "Here, take this," but simply the continuation of a habit. They've been sharing their sweets since they were 5 and 7, I'd imagine. And the habit has never broken. It never will. The train slows as we approach the outskirts of Travemünde. The light grows even more golden. That's the color of a Baltic summer evening, when the sun descends toward the sea. And I see one sister lean toward the other, and the other leans back, and they say nothing. They simply sit there, and the marzipan is gone. They've shared it and eaten it. But this moment remains. 2 old sisters on a train near the sea they've known since childhood. I imagine they've perhaps done this journey 100 times. Perhaps not 100, but many. And perhaps it won't happen 100 more times. Perhaps this will be one of the last times they travel together. Or perhaps not. But in this moment, they're not looking to the future. They're seeing only this window, this light, this marzipan, this closeness that isn't quite an embrace, but simply one shoulder against another. The train stops. Travemünde. The sea is near. You can smell it, that salty, damp air seeping through everywhere. The 2 women stand, and it's unhurried, not painful. They stand, and one takes the other's arm, not because she needs supporting, but because that's the natural way to walk together. They move down the aisle, and I watch them go. The pale blue dress first, and then the other, and they move like 2 people who know who they are. They step out, and I see them on the platform below, their silhouettes now lit against the golden light, and they walk together toward the exit. Together. Arm in arm isn't quite the word. It's more than that. It's the knowledge that you're not alone. That so long as you have this other person, you cannot be alone. They pass out of my sight. The train sits still, and I'm here, thinking of these 2 women, these 2 sisters. I'll probably never see them again. I don't know their names, their stories, the exact details of their lives, but I've seen something in them that's possible. Something that says, it's not a bad thing to have another person. To have another person who knows you, who knows your story, who sits with you while the world glides past. The salty wind of the Baltic comes through the windows now. The train empties, or begins to empty. People step out, others step in. But I'm here, in this moment, with the memory of 2 sisters who traveled together to Travemünde. They'll walk to the seaside. They'll look at the waves. They'll perhaps eat an ice cream, or take a walk, or simply sit and watch the light falling across the water. And they'll be together. That's all they need. And I'm here, and the wind touches my face. And I think about love. Not the loud kind of love, not the love in films and songs, but the quiet kind. The love that doesn't need explaining. The love that sits in silence and simply knows. And I'm so tired suddenly, so wonderfully, deeply tired. And I can lean back in this seat, in this compartment, in this train, and know that there are people everywhere, in every train, in every city, who are together, who sit shoulder to shoulder, who share their marzipan, who watch the sea while the sun goes down. I met the knife sharpener on the line from Aachen to Liège on an autumn day when the rain was so fine it didn't fall but hung in the air like a curtain of water through which the train passed. He was already in the compartment when I boarded, a man in his late 60s perhaps, wearing a cap and holding a cotton bag on his lap with the handle of a pair of scissors poking out. He looked at me as I sat down, briefly, kindly, without saying anything. The sort of look that says, "I see you, but I don't need anything from you." His face was narrow and weathered, as if he'd spent years in the open air, on street corners and market squares, and his cap sat on his head as if it had never sat anywhere else. What struck me first were his hands, not because they were rough, but because they weren't. Smooth hands, almost soft, on a man who'd worked with metal and stone his whole life. I asked if I was seeing that right, and he turned his palms over and showed me. "Water," he said. "The whetstone always needs water. 60 years my hands were wet. The water protected them." He was a knife sharpener. One of the last, he said, but without sadness, more like someone stating a fact, the way you'd say it's raining or the train's running late. He'd traveled from market to market since he was 15. Saturdays the markets, Sundays the journey to the next town. One pair of scissors after another, one blade after another, one sickle after another. His life was a circle, he said, and the circle was large. From Aachen to Liège, to Brussels, to Antwerp, back through Eindhoven into Germany, and come spring, starting over again. The train crossed the border somewhere between Aachen and Welkenrath, where you can't quite say where Germany ends and Belgium begins. The landscape shifts imperceptibly, as if someone's turning a dial. The hills flatten, the fields grow wider, and old industrial buildings appear. Pit heads and factory halls with blind windows that stare through the autumn mist like faces remembering something. The knife sharpener wasn't looking out the window. He'd seen this landscape thousands of times before. The knife sharpener looked out the window and said, "I know every village here. Not the names, I've forgotten those, but the markets. I know where to set up the stand best, where the sun hits in the morning, where the housewives pass first." He smiled, a short, dry smile. "In Liège, there's a woman," he said, "who's been bringing me the same pair of scissors for 30 years. Every time she says this time is the last sharpening, and every time she comes back." I asked him what makes a good pair of scissors. He opened his bag and pulled out a small whetstone, flat and grey, worn smooth by decades, with a hollow in the middle where his thumb had rested 1,000 times, 10,000 times. He weighed the stone in his hand and said, "A good pair of scissors must be sharp, sharp enough to cut silk without moving it, but it must also be gentle, gentle enough for the thinnest paper." And then he said something I didn't quite understand at first. "The sharper the blade," he said, "the gentler the cut." He said it like something he'd said many times before, without needing to explain it. And I sat there thinking about it. A dull blade tears. It drags at the fabric, the paper, the material. It needs force and violence. But a sharp blade, it glides through, effortlessly. Sharpness isn't the opposite of gentleness. It's the condition for it. The knife sharpener packed the stone away again and tied his bag shut. He did it with the same smooth, water-kept hands, slowly and carefully, as if the bag itself deserved respect. Outside the window, the rain continued to hang, fine and grey, and the Belgian landscape slipped past, flat and still. He talked about the markets that are shrinking. Once upon a time, he said, Saturday was the most important day of the week. People came with everything that had a blade. Scissors, knives, sickles, axes sometimes. He sharpened them all, from 7 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. And by day's end, his hands were so wet and so tired he couldn't close them. Now people buy new scissors when theirs grow dull, throw them away and replace them. But there are still some, he said, and his voice had grown warmer, as if he'd entered a room where he felt at home. There are still some who come with their grandmother's scissors. 100 years old sometimes, the steel still good, the screw still tight. And then I sharpen them, and the woman goes home and cuts fabric for a dress her granddaughter will wear. 3 generations in one pair of scissors. He shook his head, not in disbelief, but in wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe something so beautiful was still possible. My stop came. Aachen, I read on the sign, and the train began to slow. I picked up my bag and stood. The knife sharpener shook my hand, and it was cool and smooth and slightly damp, as if it still carried the water of 60 years of whetstones within it. Watch out for sharp things, he said. Not every sharpness means to hurt. I stepped out, and through the window I could still see him sitting there, upright, his cap on his head, his bag on his lap, on his way to Liège, to Brussels, to Antwerp, ever onward, in a circle that never closes, yet always leads back to the beginning. The train carried on into the rain, which still hung rather than fell. And somewhere in that rain, there travels a man with smooth hands and a whetstone, and a wisdom so simple you almost miss it. The sharper the blade, the gentler the cut. And autumn hangs in the air, and the trains go on, and the scissors wait, and everything grows still, and soft, and slow. I was perhaps 20 years old when it happened. A spring morning on the line between Spiez and Kandersteg, at the Lötschberg, where trains pass under the mountain and emerge into a different world on the other side. That's the first thing I remember. Not the exact time of year, but the feeling. A world waking up. I was lying in the compartment, and when I opened my eyes, I was alone. 6 seats, all empty except mine, and the door across was standing open, as if someone had just stepped out. I don't remember all the details anymore. But I know the compartment had been full when I boarded. Italians, a family with children, an older gentleman with newspapers on his lap. They'd been talking and laughing, and the children had been eating biscuits, and at some point, I'd fallen asleep to the sound of their voices. But somewhere in the night, they'd all stepped out, one by one, at stations whose names I never knew. They were gone, and I hadn't noticed. I was young enough to feel afraid, and old enough to understand that fear here was baseless. The compartment was simply empty. The lights were still on. The train was running quietly. or perhaps it wasn't quiet, but I heard nothing but the rhythmic rolling of the wheels beneath me, that eternal prayer of the railway. I sat up slowly, as if sudden movement might break something. My rucksack was still on the rack above. I was still here. The world was still here. And then, I'll never forget this, not until my last breath, the tunnel came to an end. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't darkness slowly becoming light. It was a door. 1,000 feet of stone parted from sky, and light came pouring in like water into a well. And what light it was! So white, so golden, so absolutely bright that I had to close my eyes involuntarily. My hand shot up to shield my face like against a blow. This wasn't ordinary daylight. This was spring sun on snow, filtered through a height I couldn't comprehend. I opened my eyes millimeter by millimeter. The compartment was no longer a compartment. It was a window. I could see nothing but white and green. White from the snow on the mountains, green from the first meadows down in the valley, where it was warm enough that grass was growing, tentatively and pale, as if it didn't quite dare. The train had emerged from the Lurchberg between Spitz and Kandersteg, and it was waking me, the way someone taps you awake, gently but inescapably, into the world. I stood up. I don't know why. It wasn't a conscious decision. My body stood up on its own, and I opened the window. The air that rushed in was cold. Not winter cold, but the cold of altitude, thin and clear and so fresh that it burned in my lungs. But in a good way, the kind that says, "You're alive, you're awake, you're here." I could hear water, streams everywhere. The snow was melting, and the valley was filling with the sound of 100 small rivers all talking at once, all together, like children in a schoolyard. I leaned out the window as far as I dared, and the air struck my face, cold and wet, and full of smells, damp earth and stone, and something sweet I couldn't name. Perhaps the first flowers somewhere, or the resin of the firs standing up the slope like an army in green. I stood at the window until my eyes grew used to the light. The valley was so green. Not the green of Germany or France, but the green of the heights, thin and pale and luminous, as if someone had just invented it. The mountains stood around me like sentinels. I was a child in that moment. Everything I'd known before, where I'd come from, where I was going, who I was meant to be, all of it had been left behind in the tunnel. What came out was only this: the light, the height, the feeling of being between worlds. The compartment was still empty. I was still alone. But it was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. It was complete. A compartment is just a row of walls, wood and metal and a door. But when you wake up in one that's empty while you're emerging from darkness into such light, then a compartment is a sanctuary. It's a place where you're allowed to be alone without being abandoned. The train never slowed. It simply went on, down into the valley, away from the height, onward to the next stations. But I didn't see it. I'd closed my eyes again, not from fear or tiredness, but because I wanted to keep the light in the darkness. I wanted it to exist only for me. If I opened my eyes, it would become real, and then it could disappear again. with eyes closed. It was eternal. Now, all these years later, I travel through Switzerland again. I'm not on the Lötschberg. That's a different line, a different season. But every time the train enters a tunnel, I remember. I wait for that door, that moment when the darkness opens and light comes flooding in like truth. It never happens the same way twice, but it's always there. The empty compartment, the feeling of waking in a world that's brand new, and the certainty that somewhere under the mountain, under all that stone, under all that darkness, there's still snow, and still green, and still streams singing while the world wakes up. The train beneath me carries on. I'm older now, but the light under the mountain isn't older. It's still young, still golden, still a secret that belongs only to me. And when I close my eyes, just as I did when I was 20, I see it still. The empty compartment, the door between worlds, and myself emerging from darkness. It was summer, and Saxon Switzerland looked like something that only exists in dreams. I was sitting on the train from Dresden to Bad Schandau, and next to me at the window sat a man who apparently never intended to look out of it. He was in his 40s, perhaps older, hard to say, with the complexion of someone who's been in the sun for a very long time. His skin was brown as wood, his eyes were green and calm, and on his lap sat a rucksack that was worn through and sun-faded, as if it had endured thousands of kilometers. I wouldn't have paid him any mind if the train hadn't passed the first gorge. The sandstone formations of Saxon Switzerland suddenly rose up, not gradually, but like giants waking. They're strange for the region, old and eroded, with peaks and towers that look like castles left unfinished. The afternoon light, it was still early, perhaps 4 o'clock, fell golden on their faces. The man beside me opened his eyes as if someone had touched him at exactly that moment. He wasn't looking at the mountains. He was looking at me. "It's beautiful here," I said. I don't know why. It was a foolish thing to say, but I wanted him to look outward again. The man nodded, but not at the mountains. "Yes," he said. "That's the problem." I didn't understand, and he saw that at once. He shifted his rucksack onto his lap, a small, unconscious movement, as if preparing for something. "When the world is too beautiful," he said slowly, "you forget to keep going. Or no, perhaps you forget why you're still alive at all." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I already knew. Or, no, I didn't know, but I felt it. A deep not understanding that was itself understanding. The man leaned against the window. "I'm not looking for anything," he said. "That's the first thing you need to understand. I'm not traveling to find something. I'm traveling because I have to travel." Then, after a pause long enough to make me nervous, "I am on the way." I couldn't resist asking, "To where?" The man looked at me, and his face didn't change, but his eyes did. They grew larger, or no, they grew deeper. "It's the same thing," he said. "The way and the destination are the same. That's all I know anymore." I asked him how long he'd been traveling. "A year," he said. perhaps too. Time is a strange thing when you don't stay in one place. It passes faster, or no, it accumulates differently. A day is long, and a month has gone by. I asked where he was from. He said there was a place, but wouldn't say which. I was something, he said. A profession, a family, a house where I grew up and where I slept. And one day I woke up and knew that wasn't my life. So I left. The train runs along the river now. The river is the Elbe, but here in Saxon Switzerland, it looks like something magical. A thin stream, green and quick, winding between the sandstone towers as if it knows it's something special. The man looks at the Elbe, and it's the first time he's really looked outward. The river knows where it's going, he says. But not why. Perhaps that's enough. I ask if he'll ever stop. He looks at me. Yes, he says, when I get to where I'm meant to be. But I won't know I'm there until I am. And perhaps I'm already there and just don't know it yet. We travel in silence for a while. The light grows more golden. True golden hour, where the world looks like it's made of honey. The rucksack on his lap is older than old. There are patches over patches and pockets completely worn through. There's also no brand label, just a rucksack that can carry everything you need and nothing more. What do you do? I asked. For money, I mean. The man shrugs. Work, he says, when there's work. Harvest, gardens. Sometimes I write for local newspapers about the places I come to. But I don't need much money. A rucksack is cheap to feed. Bad Schandau is approaching. I can see the town through the windows. Not large, but alive, with hotels and restaurants, and people living more ordinary lives than the man beside me. This is my stop, he says, but not as information for me, more as information for himself. I was here 3 days last summer. There's a forest above the town that's very old. I'll go back up there to see if it's grown older still. I laugh, which is unexpected for us both. Forests don't grow older, I say. They grow. The man nods. Yes, he says. That's exactly the secret. The train slows, and I realize this is the end. The man stands, very slowly, as if waking from something deep. He takes his rucksack, and then he looks at me. And I see him truly for the first time. He's young and old at once. He looks like someone who's lost a great deal, and like someone who's found a great deal. Thank you, he says, for asking. Most people don't. Most people don't want to know. I wanted to ask him where he's really going, or why he left, or if he'd ever come back. But I knew those questions weren't meant for me. The train stops. The man takes his rucksack and goes to the door. He doesn't look back. I notice that particularly. He opens the door, and the Elbe and the sandstone towers and the golden air pour in. Then he's gone, and I see him on the platform, just long enough that I know he's there, and then he turns and walks toward the mountains, away from the town, away from me. On the way, and hours later, as I lie in my bed at night, I think of his words. I'm not searching. I'm on the way. and I still don't understand what he meant. But that's all right. Perhaps that's the secret exactly. Not understanding it, but feeling it. And when I close my eyes, I see him climbing the path into the mountains, into the old darkness of the forest. And he's still walking, and will always be walking. She was sitting 2 seats along at the window, and the dog lay on a blanket. Not on a seat, but on a blanket she'd spread on the floor. The woman was in her late 50s, with gray hair tied back in a loose plait. Not well groomed, but not neglected either. More like someone who doesn't spend much time thinking about how she looks. The dog was small, perhaps 10 pounds, with fur that must once have been white and was now the color of old coffee. A very old dog. The woman kept stroking his back, not the way you'd pet something you love, but the way you'd stroke a stone you've carried for a long time. I wouldn't have paid her any mind if the train hadn't passed through a station and the woman had suddenly sat up, not excited, but alert, as if checking that something was still there. She looked out the window with an intensity I only know from people who are saying goodbye. That was it. She was in transit. Not in the sense that she was traveling, but that she'd packed up her life and was unpacking it somewhere else. I saw a suitcase under her seat, not new but familiar, as if it had kept pace with her on many journeys. "Nice dog," I said. It was a simple opening, but I needed an opening. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was more an acknowledgement that I existed. "Thank you," she said. "He's very old, 14 years. That's a long time for such a small dog. Some people say he should have died long ago, but he carries on." She stroked his ear, and the dog didn't stir. He was sleeping, or perhaps he was awake, but too weak to show it. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She said, "Bruck an der Mur. I moved to Graz when I was 28. That was more than 30 years ago. Now I'm going to my sister. I'm too old to live alone, and my sister has a large house." She said this very directly, without self-pity, but without joy either. It was simply the truth, spoken the way you'd speak about the weather. "And the dog?" She looked at the dog, and her face changed for a brief moment. "The dog comes with me. That was the first thing I told my sister. If I come, Schorsch comes. That's his name, Schorsch. She understands that. She's had dogs too." She leaned back, but her hand remained on Schorsch's back. "He's become very fearless," she said. "When he was younger, if the train whistled, these loud trains, you know, he'd bark. For hours he'd bark without stopping. I thought I'd go mad. But now," she gestured to the sleeping dog, "now he sleeps, no matter how loud it gets." "That's good, isn't it?" I said. She looked at me, and in her eyes I suddenly saw much more. She looked at me as if I'd understood something very important. "Yes and no," she said. "It means he's learned. It means not everything that's loud is dangerous. But it also means he's grown old. Barking was his strength. Now he doesn't even have fear left." She fell silent for a while, and I knew she wasn't talking about the dog. The woman told me about Graz. She said the city is very beautiful, but that she'd lost herself in it. Her husband had died 8 years ago, she said, and she was left alone with Schorsch. She worked in a garden. She was a gardener, she told me, and she lived in a small house overlooking the moor. Every morning she'd sit on the balcony and watch the water, and Schorsch would sit beside her and sleep. It was enough, she said, or I thought it was. But one day I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. The garden knew me, the house knew me, Schorsch knew me, but I didn't know myself. She spoke very quietly, but I heard all her verbs in different tenses. She spoke about her life as if speaking about someone else. It wasn't distance, it was acceptance. She'd taken herself in, this woman with the old dog and the suitcase, who was on a train to a new sister in a new city. "Why now?" I asked. She said her sister had rung. She'd mentioned work. There's a large botanical garden in Brook, and she'd said she needed help. I thought, that's my sign, the woman said. That's my moment to be someone who grows gardens again, instead of living in gardens. We talked a bit more, but not much. The woman reminded me not of family. She reminded me of life, how it simply continues in new containers with new meanings. The dog remained asleep the whole time. His chest rose and fell, very slowly, very deeply. The woman kept stroking his back, and if I didn't know better, I'd have thought she was stroking herself through the dog's touch, on the way to her sister. At the last stations before Brock, the woman grew quieter. She shifted the suitcase, an action that was very practical, but also very final. She woke Schorsch gently, and he blinked once, twice, and then was asleep again. She took his little blanket and folded it, not quickly, but with a kind of ritual, as if saying, "That's finished." The compartment, the long sleep, the sadness, it's all finished. The train began to slow, and the woman stood. She took the suitcase and the blanket and lifted the dog, very carefully, supportively, the way you'd lift a child. Schorsch hung in her arms, and his head fell back, and his eyes were still closed. "Goodbye," the woman said to me, or perhaps to herself. It was nice to talk. The light outside was golden. We were approaching evening, and Brook an der Mur would soon arrive. A new place, a new sister, a new garden. She went to the door, and I noticed she didn't look back. She looked out at the green hills of Styria, at the gentle mountains that make this region simple and old and wonderful. And as the train stopped, and as she stepped out, with the old dog in her arms, the little blanket over her shoulder, I saw clearly, all at once. She wasn't sad. She was ready. She was like a woman who'd learned that not everything that changes is dangerous, that you can grow old and still begin again. And when I close my eyes, I still see her, the woman and the old dog on the platform, ready for whatever comes. The night train south is full when it leaves Munich. It's always like that. The train is Europe, miniaturized and complete. I'm the one other person in the compartment who's awake while everyone else sleeps. That's always how it is. There's always one person awake, and there are always people sleeping. That's the rule. Across from me there's a girl, perhaps 17, perhaps 18, with her head leaning against the window. She's sleeping deeply. Her mouth is open slightly, not unpleasantly, just the way people sleep when they're really sleeping. She's got a flight ticket tucked in her rucksack. If I can see it correctly, it's to Sicily. Or perhaps I know that from the way she sleeps, like someone heading somewhere warm. Next to me, on my side, sits an older man. His glasses are resting on his hair, and his head is thrown back as if he's staring at the sky. But his sky is the black ceiling of the compartment. He's not snoring. He's simply breathing heavily and regularly, like a machine working itself without thinking. A newspaper from this morning lies on his lap. He's read it, and then forgotten he was holding it, and then fallen asleep. It's a German newspaper. I can't tell which one. There are 3 others in the compartment. A woman sitting in the other corner, and 2 young men stretched out on the upper berths. The woman is perhaps 60. Impossible to tell when sleeping, because all people become either young or old in their sleep. She breathes through her mouth, not snoring, but like someone who really needs to sleep. The 2 young men are beside each other, their heads almost touching, as if seeking comfort in each other's nearness, even in sleep. They're probably friends. They could be brothers too. In the dark, it's impossible to say. I sit and watch them. It's not creepy. It's scientific. It's religious. It's the only thing I can do while they all sink beneath the blanket of night, down into the thing that belongs only to them. The train is now the only thing awake. The train and me. We're still moving through Bavaria. The window shows nothing, only the darkness of a night so black that darkness is a name, not an absence of light. But I can feel the landscape is there. The mountains are still far away. This is just fields, long and flat and sleeping. The train makes its sound, not loud, not quiet, but present. That's the mantra. That's the prayer. The train sings itself into the Alps. The woman in the compartment stirs. She swallows, and her head rolls onto her shoulder. Her glasses fall from her head onto her lap. She doesn't notice. She sleeps deeper. The girl is dreaming. I see her eyes moving beneath her eyelids. A dream of water, perhaps, or of arriving. The 2 young men remain as they are, tangled in each other's nearness like roots. The night grows deeper. Or perhaps I'm simply growing more tired. It's past 1 now, and I haven't slept in a long time. I notice I'm beginning to dangle between perception and drowsiness. The old man beside me is really snoring now. Not loudly, but rhythmically. The breath of a man whose body is entirely focused on the task of moving air. Where are we now? Not far, perhaps still in Upper Bavaria. The destination is Verona, and we still have 10 hours to go, perhaps more. The Brenner line will be tough. The mountains will be tough. And somewhere in this night, somewhere between now and morning, we'll cross the Austrian-Italian border. No one will know. No one will wake. The border will pass beneath us, and we'll sleep on. That's the mystery of the night train. That's the secret. You don't need to know where you are, because time speaks a different language when you're asleep. Countries are only names when you're awake, but when you're sleeping, they're just movement. You move from one place to another, but you don't notice. Your body does the work. Your mind is elsewhere. And then, it's the first sign we're approaching the mountains. The train enters a tunnel. The light from outside, not that there's much light, vanishes, and there's only the black compartment and the eyes I'm managing to keep open. The sound changes. It becomes resonant. The train sings into the mountain, and the mountain sings back. It's a conversation that's ancient. It's the only conversation that matters. Tunnel after tunnel. We're in the Alps now, I know that. The Austrian side. This is the territory before the Brenner. The train slows. Not much, but enough that I notice it. The rails move under a pressure that only mountains can give. And they're all still sleeping. The girl, the old man, the woman, the two young men. They're all still here, in this compartment, in this moment. And they have no idea that we're passing under a mountain, that we're crossing the earth, that we're just crossing a border, that we're just leaving one country and entering another. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's beautiful. That's the thing only the night train can do. It takes you somewhere else while you sleep. It moves you across borders, across mountains, across darkness. And you don't notice until you arrive. And when you arrive, you're no longer the person who boarded. You're someone else. You're someone who slept under a mountain. Someone who left a country without knowing. The train breathes. The old man breathes. The girl breathes. The woman and the two young men all breathe together, all in the same darkness, all on the same journey south. The Brenner Pass will come soon. No one will see. No one will know. The train will carry on and we'll all sleep, sleep, sleep. And somewhere beneath us, beneath the tunnels and mountains, beneath earth that's thousands of years old, the border between Austria and Italy will pass underneath. A name, a line on a map, and we'll travel over it, in the dark, while everyone but me sleeps. And that's the secret of the night train. That borders and countries and time itself don't matter when you're sleeping. What matters is only the movement, the music of the train, the breath of the people around you, and the certainty that you'll travel while the night carries you, while the mountains protect you, while the world sleeps and you almost sleep with it, into this darkness, into this southern dream, into